In my estimation, The Last Spell is more than a good game. It's a great game. But one of the things that is holding it back from true legendary status in my eyes is the ability for the community to create mods and tweak all of the little things about it that we don't like or extend it in incredible ways. I have taken on the challenge of trying to do a little bit of that myself. I decided a few weeks ago to start modding The Last Spell in order to create a bit of an overhaul rebalance mod that has some of the interesting ideas that I wanted to see in the game that weren't currently. So, this video is not about that journey. If you're interested, there will be a link in the video description to a few of my modding streams where you can see some of the things we're tweaking and changing, etc. But this video is to empower you to make changes that you're excited to make as well. So without further ado, let's dive into it and talk about modding The Last Spell. First and foremost, you will see that there was a purple part 1 on the previous slide. This is not a comprehensive guide to modding. Specifically, this is addressing the low-hanging fruit, the thing that I think most people who are interested in tweaking the game might want to do without delving super deep into assembly and decompiling the game. This is going to focus on text files, specifically XML files, and the things that we can change with that. The good news is that I think the developers of The Last Spell did an amazing job separating the code and the configuration quite well. So these XML files contain a huge amount of what we need to access to make probably 75+% of the changes that I would want to make in a rebalance that I was doing. The things that you can change are weapon stats, item stats, skills, perks, building abilities, enemy abilities, behaviors, etc. You can't change everything about them. For instance, you could only swap the behavior of one enemy to a different enemy. You couldn't create an all-new enemy because an all-new enemy behavior, that is, because the enemy behavior lives in the code and then it's referenced by a specific parameter or option that is added in the XML. But you could say take a bat and make it behave like a Clar instead if you wanted to. Swap their brains out, as it were. So I am not going to be satisfied with just modifying the XML files, which is why there will be a part 2. And in that part 2, we will talk in a lot more detail about a lot of the more nuanced changes. But for now, for most people, I think this is a great starting place. I think it's very accessible, and you'll see as we kind of go how this whole process looks like. But to get into it, there's going to be a handful of tools that you're going to need that you probably don't have installed on your system. There are 3 specifically that I'm going to recommend. The first is Asset Studio Mod. This is a fork of Asset Studio. If you're not familiar with forks, basically the idea is there's an open source piece of software, someone forks that piece of software, makes some changes, and then releases it as a modified version. The reason that we need the modified version is because Asset Studio, the original version, has now been outdated. But Asset Studio is going to be our exploration and discovery tool. It has a great set of features for looking at what is inside the data files of Unity games. It has great search, it has good filtering, it presents things in a reasonably nice and clean sort of way. So this is going to be the tool that we use to look at the game files. We can't actually edit them with Asset Studio, but this is going to be invaluable because for the most part, we don't know what we can change and what we can't change until we use Asset Studio to figure it out. Once we've figured out what we want to change and how we want to change it, then we need another tool, specifically Unity Asset Bundle Extractor, aka UABE, which will also sometimes be referred to in this deck as UBAE because I am dyslexic, and sometimes I transpose letters. But don't worry about it. The 4-letter acronym that starts with a U is always going to stand for Unity Asset Bundle Extractor. Good news is the GitHub link is definitely correct. That will also be down in the description. But this is going to be the tool that we use to extract XML files from our assets file and also re-import them and rebuild rebuild and recompile the asset files in a way that the game looks at and says, yeah, no problem, I'm good with this asset file. There are lots of ways to create corrupted asset files that will do you no good because your game won't start. This piece of software, though, I will warn you, is not very user-friendly. You're not getting any of that search or any of that filtering that we like from Asset Studio, so you really need to go in with a laser-focused intention on, I need to change these 3 files using Unity Asset Bundle Extractor, and then I need to re-export it. That's the idea behind it. The final thing you're going to need is some text editor. I'm not going to be too prescriptive here. My recommendation, VS Code is free and amazing for this type of stuff, but you could do this all in Notepad if you wanted. The things that you'll be missing out on is syntax and code highlighting, aka like colored regions that says like this matches with this, some limited XML validation, like did you create well-formed XML, do all of your opening blocks of XML have matching closing blocks, etc. But you can do it with whatever you want. The other thing that we get from VS Code specifically is a really nice visual diff ability that will come in handy for telling what changes you've made. But we'll get to that when we start to talk about the process. But those 3 tools, pause here if you're planning on going through this live as we're doing it. Install them, get them all set up, and then come back and we'll continue with how to actually do the thing. Now we're going to talk about doing the thing, and doing the thing starts with the game files. So how do you find the last spell's files? Easy. Go into Steam, right-click on the last spell, go to Manage, go to Browse Local Files. This is going to take you to the game files, not your save files. Your save files are located in a different place, but this is just the core game files, the executable, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to right-click, go to Manage, go to Browse Local Files, and it's going to open up an Explorer window that has the game files in it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to open up the Asset Studio piece of software that we created. We're going to go Load Folder, and then we are going to paste in the path of the game file. So right here, you can see this right here. We have, this happens to be my directory, but you're going to go in and you're going to want to find these 2 directories which exist inside of your last spell. You find them through Steam. You grab this directory here. You can click where my cursor is right now and copy that and paste it when you're in the load folder section. And that will get you to the point where you're opening the right folder, and then you're just going to click select folder, and that's going to open it up. Once you've done that, you're going to be greeted with a UI that looks like this. You're going to have an asset list on the left that's going to have a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to have sprites. We're going to have materials. We're going to have all ilk of things. But the primary thing that we are looking for in this case are our text assets. So you can go to filter type here in the UI and then go down to text assets and limit it to only the text assets. So this is going to show you all of the files that are within the asset bundle that are text files, which are the easiest ones to edit, simplest, most straightforward. To find a specific one, you can go ahead and do a search in this little box here. Specifically, the search that I want you to do right now is skill definitions item melee weapons, which is going to come up with a single result. And that result, once you click on it, is going to show in this window the XML for all of the melee weapons, which is already super cool. Even if you're not planning on doing any modding, it's neat to be able to look at and see the specifics of this particular thing. If you wanted to broaden your search terms, you could search for just skill definitions, and that's going to show you every skill in the game, every file that houses skill definitions, and all of them. So there's a miscellaneous one, there's magic, ranged, so on and so forth. But this is going to be our tool for poking and prodding around. For a lot of the things that we're going to do, I think skill definitions is going to cover it. A lot of the things we want to change are skills, but there's also perk files, etc. We'll talk a bit more about the structure, but short and long of it is use this tool to find the things that you potentially want to change, right? If there's a particular behavior or system in the game, like let's say inns costing a certain amount of gold, there is a place in one of these files where it says inns cost X amount of gold, and you can change it with the process that I'm outlining here. But the first step is figuring out where it lives. Not always easy, not always straightforward. So once we found the files, we need to export them so that we can edit them, so we can re-import them. But first things first, let's set up a dev environment so we have a sane way of approaching this problem. This part here is optional. If you think you know better, feel free to do this whatever way you want to do it, but I'm going to walk you through how I did it, and this has been working nicely for me. So somewhere where you want to, you're going to create a project directory. For me, this was c:\source, and then I created a TLS mod directory in there where I wanted to put all of my stuff. Within that, I'm going to create two folders, assets and base, and then I'm going to put some files in the main directory of that. But the asset files directory, I'm going to copy shared assets 0.assets from the game directory _data that we saw before and put it into the assets directory. The reason that we are doing this is because the bundle extractor that we are using locks the file when you open it. When a file is locked, you can't overwrite it, you can't change it, etc. So because we have to do some updating of files in the game directory itself between reloads, the last thing we want is to have files in there locked. So we're creating a separate copy that we can essentially use as a baseline for making edits to the game. The base files directory is where I'm going to put all of the clean exported XML. So every time I export an XML from my assets file, I'm going to place it into the base files, which means that I always have a clean copy of all those files. This is useful because sometimes you make a mistake in an edit. You want to be able to compare what's going on with the previous version. You want to be able to do some diffs. Having the base files handy is very useful. So what I would do is put all the base files that I'm editing into that directory, and then all of the modded files live in the root of my project. So it would just be directly in TLS mods. And every time I'm editing a base file, I would copy that base file into the modded files, the root of the project, and then make the edits in there. So then I have the modded version of the file, I have the base version in my base directory, and I have the asset file that contains everything in a separate directory locked up by the bundle extractor, but I don't really care. So this image just lays it out pretty straightforward. You have your root project directory, two folders, assets and base, and then any modded XML files live down here in the root. Hopefully that's straightforward. If a different pattern works for you, let me know. I'm curious if people figure out better ways to do any of this stuff. But now we're going to move on to the bundle extractor. So after we open up the asset bundle extractor, we're just going to go file open, and then we're going to open that .assets file that exists inside of the assets directory in our project folder, right? It's going to get locked, and our UI is going to look like this. We're going to have a little bit of a tree structure over here, but more than anything, we're just going to have a giant list of garbage over here with a couple of buttons on the right-hand side. Nothing too crazy. The issue, actually, before I go any further, though, is short of sorting based on these, there's not a lot you can do with this interface, which is why I say, use it as sparingly as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort by name, and we are literally going to scroll down until we find that file that we were looking at before, which is skill definitions, items, melee weapons. We are going to click it, and we are going to click view data. So that's this one here, view data right here. Export raw, export dump, import raw, import dump. These do not work the way that you think they should work, or at least they didn't work the way that I thought they should work. My expectation was that they would allow me to export a bunch of files really quickly, import them back in, do a lot of cool stuff. All of it created corrupted assets files. So I don't know what's going on with that, but my recommendation is that you take that one file that you had and from the asset list, you click on it and then you click view data, and it's going to create a new tab for the items, melee, weapons entity here. Once you have that, you can expand the field here, the text asset base, and you'll end up with a name here and then the script being the actual text of the XML here. You can right click on that and you can go ahead and export that file. When you do, it's going to pop up a rather dumb dialog that does not suggest a name. So my recommendation is copy the value from here and then use that to add a .xml to it and make that the name of what you export into your base directory. So, you can take a few minutes. If there's a couple of these files you want to edit, you export them all into your base directory, and you get a nice little list in your base directory. Once you have that, it's time to start making edits. So the way that I recommend doing the edits, and you can see a live version of me doing this on stream, links down below, but the short version is I take each of the files I want to edit and I use VS Code's compare to create a split screen view of the base version of the file, which is this one here on the left, and the edited version of the file here. The idea being that then you can see exactly the changes that you've made. If you have to roll any back, it's very, very straightforward. In this particular case, just to talk through this so that you get one example of what modifying it looks like, I've went ahead and changed the range to be exactly 1. I've left the cardinal directions the same. I've changed the area effect and origin. So basically what we did here is we made it so that rather than super spin being a circle, it's now a quarter of a circle, but you get to do it 4 times with the multi-hit. The range can't change on it. So basically, you can just do, if you wanted to, you could do 4 L-shaped hits here, or you could hit it 4 times and create the full loop. I think it's a neat idea for making super spin a little more flexible, while at the same time kind of retaining some of that identity if you can dive into the middle and just explode things. I also think it's probably, we've joked a bit in stream about the fact that it's probably the most balanced multi-hit attack because you can only ever hit enemies that are in your immediate proximity, unlike the wand and the hand crossbow. But anyways, I digress. These are the types of changes that you can make relatively easily. Of note, the area effect, the origin, is based on 0 counting, and you'll see when you kind of go through it. But in this case, I basically said the X origin is 0, 1, 2. And then the Y origin is 0, which counts from the bottom. So this X that my little cursor is on right here, in fact, I can... maybe I can do this to do this. X here is the X that is the origin, and you need to get your origins right or things are going to be a little wonky, but I digress. That's not the most important part of this. The main idea is you make the changes that you want to make. A few tips for making changes. The first is a bit of a caveat. Normally with XML, the way that you know if XML is valid or not is by also having a XSD, which is a schema file that says what can be the child of what else, what things can go in what places. We don't have the XSD files yet for the last spell, which means we don't know all the things that we can do in any given place. We don't know what blocks of XML can go in what places. So for now, your best bet is to copy judiciously, right? Take a look at the other things that are already being done, figure out how you can modify them and put them in the place that you want to do. If you want something to have an effect like a pistol, or you want to add momentum, go find another momentum ability and see how they added it and where it's located. If you want something to refund movement points, go find a skill that has a refund to movement, so on and so forth. Copy with an extreme prejudice. The next thing is that the XML maps to code, right? So when you have an XML section that says momentum true, the game knows what momentum is, not because of other XML. Unfortunately, there is a piece of code that says this is what momentum is. When something says momentum true, this is how you behave. We can't modify those. We can only modify, say, what has momentum. But as you saw before, there's a lot of things that are relatively genericized, like area effects we can change and those types of things. But you can't change everything. You, for instance, probably couldn't make it so contaminate spread to 3 enemies rather than 2. Just as a PSA, make sure your XML is well formatted. If you're using something like VS Code, this gets a lot easier. Not everything is a skill, right? So skills are skills. Those are activated abilities. But for instance, perk definitions.xml is where the non-skill perks like spiky counter live. Very helpful to keep that in mind when you're making edits. But figuring out what files contain what stuff, that's what Asset Studio is for. And so explore, poke around, see what you can find. There's lots of interesting stuff in there. And I will say, to the credit of the developers, they have done an amazing job of pushing a ton of stuff into the XML, which means that we have a lot of flexibility, and the kind of future state of modding is incredibly bright. Very excited. I hope that a DLC adds modding soon. So we made a bunch of changes to a bunch of files. Now it is time to reinsert them into the asset file so that we can put that into the last spell files and make everything work and see our changes. So basically, once you've modified a file, you reinsert it using the import data from file button. Right? So just like we did export in the same tab, you're going to do import data from file, and you are going to import the file that you have made the changes to. Now, it is very important. They don't have a bulk option here, which means that you can get mixed up and import the ranged skills into the melee skills tab if you're not careful, and it will blow everything up and make your game very unhappy. So be very careful about what files get inserted into what places. The other note is that the way that the bundle extractor works is basically you open the file, it creates a lock on it. And then as you import files, it keeps them in memory and then writes them when you need them written. What this means is that if you close the bundle extractor and then reopen it, it's going to forget all of the things that you have already imported, which means every time you open up the bundle extractor, you have to open all the files you want changed and then go through each one and re-import the modified file that you had created. It's a little labor intensive, especially if you're modifying a bunch of files. Like I said, I haven't found a way to do bulk imports that creates a valid asset file. So if you figure that out, let me know. But the idea is you do all those imports, and then the last thing you need to do is you need to save and export the file. So this is a very easy step. Basically, you just go in and you go File, Apply and Save right here. And then it's going to automatically suggest the creation of a file called shared asset 0 assets-mod right here. And it will, I think by default, put it in the same directory as the assets file. So in that case, that's in your project directory. So I export that file as is. I copy that file into the _data directory in the last spell game files. It won't overwrite anything because it has this -mod on it. I then delete or add a .bak for .backup to the existing file, whose name is shared assets 0 assets, and then I rename this file in the game files to shared asset 0 assets. By doing this, I've now replaced that file. Now, the last spell has no facilities for dynamically reloading its assets, which means that at this point, if you have not already, you need to exit out of the last spell. There's no problem with overwriting or replacing that file while you're playing the game because everything's loaded into memory in the last spell, but you need to exit completely out of the game and then you need to re-enter the game. And when you do, if you've done everything right, your changes will be present. Now, the cool thing is the game files, like your save file where you have like a current run where you're doing some testing, doesn't remember any of the old stuff. So if you go back in and you've made changes, all of a sudden, pistol shot does 6,000 damage. That's all fine, and you can do your testing on, say, the same map repeating over and over again. But that's the process. In a nutshell, just to summarize, basically what you're doing here is you find the stuff you want to edit. You export it using the bundle extractor. You edit those files using a text editor of your choice. I recommend VS Code. You re-import those files. You rebuild the asset file using the previous step of the bundle extractor. You do the save and apply and save all piece, and then you copy that modded file into your game files and replace the shared asset that is already in there with the -mod version that you've created. And you're off to the races. That right there is in under 25 minutes how you modify files in the last spell. if you're interested in seeing me do this live, my live streams on Wednesdays will often be modding streams moving forward. I have grand plans for what my mod is going to look like. So highly recommend you swing by there. If you want to talk more about modding or you have questions, the Discord is linked below. Would love to have you come ask any questions or make suggestions. I'm very much in the brainstorming stages of the mod that I am generating. And so if you're not interested in modding but want to talk about some of your balance ideas, I'd love to have that happen, or come to the live stream and do it. But for now, this has just been a PSA for people that are interested in modding. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you all in the next one or on a live stream or wherever else. But take it